Members, we're going to start. We actually don't have a quorum yet. I'd rather start with a quorum, and I'll interrupt you, Representative Lueck, as soon as we get a quorum to officially. Members, I'd like to bring the Environment, Natural Resources Policy and Finance Committee to order. Representative Fenton, you want to move the minutes of March 24th?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Minutes are adopted. Members, we're going to move the agenda around a little bit. We have one member who's not on the committee that actually is supposed to be somewhere else at the same time. So, Representative Lueck, I would like to move House File 1096 for possible inclusion in a later bill. Good morning, Representative Lueck. If you want to explain your bill, and then Representative Lueck, at some point we'll potentially lay your bill over, and you may leave, but we may have a broader discussion. I've had a number of folks mention to me they wanted to take this opportunity because I think a lot of the DNR lands type of people are here today. So don't be offended if we continue to discuss land things, but you have to move on. Representative Lueck, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Obviously, this bill today has to do with how we manage school trust lands, and it was put together by the Legislative Permanent School Trust Land Commission. So there are a number of us that are members of that commission that are carrying bills that have to do with how we manage that. And if you look at the co-authors, it enjoys bipartisan support, and also would like to specifically thank the chair, Chair McNamara, because he's been involved in this over the years as we've just simply tried to enhance the management of our school trust lands, because they actually belong to the children, to the schools, and we're the caretakers, and the Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources is obviously the overall manager. So this bill, what it does is deals with how we would exchange or sell or otherwise dispose of school trust land that may be trapped inside of another type of state or even county-owned land. For example, we could have school trust land that sits in the middle of a state park. The state constitution and current state statute requires that we generate the maximum amount of revenue that we can that would go toward funding our schools from that property. Well, that may not be possible in some scenarios where you have a piece locked into a property that we've decided has a different use. And this started back when the state was formed. That's when we created and designated all this land. So we're working on a hundreds of years process here. This bill just simply gives the commissioner a very clear new tool, not necessarily a new tool, but it clarifies it, and would allow for condemnation proceedings. And I'm sure the hair goes up on everybody's neck when you hear condemnation proceedings. We shouldn't be concerned about that, because what we're really talking about here is a process to move property within state government. In other words, it's already government owned. So the way this would work is to ensure that we've got a clear, transparent process there. If we've got a piece of land in a state park or a wildlife management area that belongs to the school trust fund, we would just go through that process, which requires third-party appraisers to come up with a fair value market price for that property, and then we would simply, for example, sell that property out of the school trust fund over to maybe wildlife management or parks and recreation. Those dollars would then go into the school trust fund in accordance with our state constitution. So when we hear the word condemnation, we're talking about a friendly process that's transparent, it's third party, and the second part of that is that costs money, obviously, and we've discussed this amongst the Land Commission folks. We would suggest that for a starting appropriation that we begin at $20 million, and you'll see that's section 2 of the bill. That would provide the Commissioner of Natural Resources with the money to start this process, and so that may raise your eyebrows, but we've already examined this in detail, and we have probably an $85 million, the estimate is about $85 million worth of property sitting over here where we can't maximize the revenue from it, it's in other forms, like I say. And so this $20 million number is just the beginning, and we're going to be back at this year after year. So with that, any questions? We're just trying to move the process along, give the DNR an additional clear tool that would help expedite the process.
Thank you, Representative Lueck. Representative Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Lueck. I'm back here. I remember carrying a bill that would have taken 86,000 acres out of the Boundary Waters canoe area and traded it for some land in Chippewa Forest and other areas with the federal government, with the idea at the time that the land and the value of the land was of more value to us in terms of minerals and timber and leases for hunting and various things than the actual sale of property. I'm concerned when I hear that we're going to sell school trust fund lands, and I'm just wondering if indeed, I understand that we don't have a director of the school trust fund lands yet, other than the commissioner, and we talked then about the three-legged stool and the commissioner maybe not being the person that should be in charge of. I guess my question, rather than ramble on here, the question is: Are we sure that this is the best way to maximize these particular lands in terms of economic value to the school trust, or is it possible in the trading of these lands that we could actually establish some lands that do have more economic potential?
Representative Lueck, and if you want, we could do a call-a-friend to get an update on what Representative Hancock is talking about, because Representative Hancock's a good friend, Representative Rukavina, called me a couple times in the last few weeks to give me an update on the status. So, Representative Lueck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I believe you're referring to a long ongoing process to deal with school trust lands that are trapped in Boundary Waters canoe area, and I believe about half of those acreage right now, the Department of Ag Forest Service has that proposal to trade out some of those lands so that we could free them up. It's under review and public comment right now, and I believe there's a couple weeks left. So that process is moving forward. But to go back to more direct question, one, I would see this used very seldom, but when you get a circumstance where you've got public trust lands locked right in the middle of a state park, we're not going to turn the loggers loose in there and tear that 40 acres or quarter section up and turn it into active logging or a scientific or a natural area. In that case, it may be, we want the commissioner to be able to take a look at this with our commission's oversight and make a determination. If it makes more sense that we buy that property out, take those dollars, put it in the school trust fund, and it'll stay there. So I don't see this being used very often, but I share your concern there. But there are some things that are just frankly unworkable. When we get a piece locked up in a state park and we can't log it or lease it for other purposes because of the use, this is a way, again, in a limited manner, to simply have the state park, those folks would buy that property basically from the school trust fund, because we got to remember, when you stand back and look at this, it's school trust fund land. It's not DNR land. So there's a difference. So and again, I can tell you, I don't think this will be used very often, but there are a number of circumstances like this where that may be the only relatively rational solution other than leave it locked up with little or no revenue coming from it. So that answer your question?
Mr. Chair.
Representative
and
Hancock.
Lueck, yeah. I guess I brought up the boundary waters just as an illustration. My real concern is this. According to the Constitution where I read it, and the reason for this law is if we're going to sell school trust fund lands, it has to be a public sale. Okay, so what I'm saying is there a way, I don't know how the school trust fund lands got in the state park in the first place or whether the park went around the land. But if one looks at the value of land today with what it was back when these were established, we could certainly say that the economic potential often will exceed the value of the land at any given time. In other words, I expect that land to go up in value. So we're taking a one-time payment and putting it into our school trust fund lands. What I'm saying is there not a better way to transfer lands that allow our trust fund lands to be productive lands within the governmental framework? And I know that was a concern when we were trying to transfer the 86,000 acres. Our concern was, or one of my concerns was, that the value of the land itself was greater than today's value of the land for sale. And I just want to make sure that before we divest ourselves of land for the school trust, that we've maximized the potential economic benefit to the school. So that's more of a statement than a question, but I feel, obviously, I feel rather passionate about this, and I want to make sure that our kids are getting the top value for their land, that is all.
And that's a point well made, Representative Hancock. Representative Fenton.
Thank you so much. Talking about selling the land trust, I just thought I would ask, and Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you can answer this, or Representative Lueck, I'd like to know if we've hired a new director yet for the School Land Trust Act. And are they here?
Representative Fenton, I do not see the gentleman that, we do not have a school trust director. We need Mr. Meyer to come down. If you want to give us an update, Commissioner Meyer, welcome to the committee. If you could identify yourself for the record.
Mr. Chairman, members of the record, Bob Meyer, Department of Natural Resources. And we kind of have about 2 or 3 different school trust land discussions going on at the same time here. The bill before you today is to provide a funding source to buy out the school trust lands that are currently encumbered by water access sites, the 50,000 acres of peatland SNAs that the legislature designated as school trust land, old growth timber sites that we need to maintain for a forest certification and things like that. All of the trust land has already been taken out of the parks. We've exchanged that land already. So this is, we did an inventory as required by statute in our 2012-13 school trust report. The inventory identified 50,000, well, you have the 51,000 acres of peatlands, also over 17,800 acres of old growth forest designations, 7,000 acres of native prairie, 207 public water access sites, and over 16,000 acres with high and outstanding biodiversity. That these funds would be used to buy those out of the trust and compensate the trust for those priorities or characteristics that we need to preserve for the Minnesota, for forestry, for production, for water access sites. So that's the purpose of this bill, is to come up with that. And actually in 2011-12, when the trust discussions also put in statute that we need to come up with a mechanism to buy these lands out. So what this is doing is providing that mechanism to begin this buyout of these encumbered school trust lands, so to speak.
So, Commissioner Meyer, then why don't you go to the second discussion? Do you want to give a quick little snapshot on the update of the exchange, and then we'll go to the third discussion?
Sure, and that's a very timely discussion, and actually our trust lands director, Aaron Vanderland, is dealing with those issues right now. Public meetings are taking place. There's a public meeting tomorrow night we're hosting for the U.S. Forest Service at the DNR buildings. I believe it starts at 4 to 7, an open house, talking about the discussion. It's the last of 4 or 5 of those meetings, I believe. We're in the process of identifying funds. We need to work with the federal government to get funds for their part of the NEPA, or the environmental review process, and that we will be seeking funding as well in the future to begin this exchange. It's well underway. We've made far more progress, I think, than people have thought in the last several years. There is strong interest within the Forest Service to get this done, so we're working with them to move forward administratively to get through with this exchange. So
Commissioner Meyer, if you could, referred to Mr. Vandelin, if you could tell us what his current position is, and then answer the third question, Representative Fenton's question.
Mr. Chair, members, yes, Mr. Vandelin is with the DNR. He's our school trust lands director. So he works independently, reports to the commissioner, overseeing our trust lands management, making recommendations on sales, transfers, exchanges, and also management practices related to those lands directly to the commissioner and to division directors.
And
the third
Representative
question I need to
Fenton's
be
question,
refreshed on.
it was, as the governor appointed the position he was supposed to appoint
Mr.
approximately
Chairman,
3 years
the
ago.
application process closed several weeks ago. I believe they're in the process of scheduling interviews and getting that taken care of. The Department of Administration is taking care of that. It is a Department of Administration position, so they are doing the hiring. I know the application closed 2 weeks ago, probably, maybe 3 weeks ago. And I was waiting for a meeting to get set up, a briefing on that for update actually later this week, hopefully.
Okay, follow-up, Representative Fenton.
And thank you, I'm good, thank you.
Representative Dill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm going to support the bill because we've really created a no way out situation in these things. No one really wants the land because they don't have access to it in general within the state parks. And we did this to ourselves in our thirst for establishing public land and state parks and wildlife management areas and scientific and natural areas. And so there needs to be a way out, and this is a mechanism to get out that meets the requirements of the Constitution, which it requires a sale to the public auction, a trade of lands for equal value, or a condemnation. Now, I'll tell you how thirsty we are for public land and to satisfy the needs of people to roam. And in Voyageurs National Park in the mid-'70s, the National Park Service came along and proposed a national park. We had 67,000 acres of state lands, which is a significant amount, were school trust lands on the Captogama Peninsula between Namakan and Lake and Captogama Lake and Rainy Lake. The then governor was able to get the land condemned and paid nothing for it. We donated the land. We donated it to the federal government so that we could get a national park. And so this is a heck of a lot better deal to be able to find an appropriation, pay the school trust, get this land off the inventory of the school trust. It's within these areas that we created, so we did this to ourselves. And this is a mechanism. It's not the best mechanism. I don't like it. It's just a way out of the wilderness on this issue. And lastly, regarding the one question about the trade pending in the boundary waters, it doesn't show. I know that they had the study group, and of course, everyone has weighed in on that and done all of this, and now they come forward with a proposal. But it says nowhere in there in the enabling language of the boundary waters in 1964 or 78, or it doesn't say anywhere in our Constitution that we can accept funds, money. It says condemnation, change land of equal values, exchange, or a condemnation. And what they're doing is proposing, the way I understand it, is an exchange, land for land plus cash. And that violates, in my estimation, the, but they have us over a barrel because we need to be able to have an economy up there and we need to be able to log and mine where appropriate. And so I'm sure that this will move forward and the DNR is working with them. That just, I don't agree. I think we should stick by the principles of what our Constitution says. But we are really in trouble with the federal government. They are the ones with the big stick, and they don't speak softly. So
Thank you,
I support the bill for that reason.
Thank you, Representative Dill. Representative Dill, I have one question to your point, and I don't think I missed it, but can't they, through public auction, also sell school trust land? That's one other option. That's
There's three options, and one is a condemnation, one is a public auction, and one is exchange of lands for equal value, those three things. And if you'll remember back when you and I were first elected, Representative McNamara and Representative Cornish, that, you know, on Trout Lake, on the north side of Lake Vermilion, near your hunting shack, you know, Representative Brookavina, that's a motorized lake in the Boundary Waters. And you can take up to a 25 horse there, and Representative Brookavina wanted to sell at a public auction the land on an island in Trout Lake in the Boundary Waters, and everyone was saying that Gino Palucci was going to buy it just because he could. And so, I mean, that didn't go very far. But, I mean, that's an example of how that would work, is to have a public auction and some person would come forward, or some entity maybe it would be the Nature Conservancy, or someone would, or some one of those land organizations would come forward and buy it. So that's the
Thank you.
answer.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Lueck. Part of my question has already been stated, but instead of the selling of this property, have you looked into why we're not exchanging it? And Representative Dill was correct. We did this to ourselves. It was, in my opinion, irresponsible to start boxing this land in the way that we did. But what about exchanging it as opposed to selling it? Because Representative Hancock is right. You know, you're limiting yourself from future income on this property.
Representative Lueck.
And I think as previously mentioned, this is just one potential option. And exchanging does take place, and maybe our DNR can update us on that, but that exchanging doesn't always work. So this is simply an option, and I want to make sure we understand that the principal or the dollars that come from the sale of that land then go over into the corpus of the school trust fund, and that is never allowed to be spent. It only can be invested. Now, right now, obviously, appreciation of land is probably better than looking for an interest bond over the long haul. But so we're simply taking something we get zero revenue from, and no anticipation that in the future we're going to be able to get any revenue from. And in that case, in a very special case, pull the dollar value out, put it over in the corpus of the trust fund, and then that has to be invested rationally, and then that revenue from that investment is used. So, and this is not the only, you know, as I said, this is just one sliver of three major processes here. So I, you know, if we could just focus on this one, and this is likely not being used often. And the important thing here to remember is what this does is, in fairness to the DNR, it provides a third party to go through this process, so it's not like me buying or selling a piece of property from my son or my dad. In other
Follow up.
words, in the family. So
Thank you.
it's
Follow up.
very important
Representative-
that we understand that.
Okay, thank you. Representative Green, you're good? Thank you. Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've authored a number of bonding bills this year, and every chair I've asked for a hearing has said we're not hearing bonding bills this year. This is a bonding bill.
Representative Hausman, this bill is here because we needed to have a discussion about school trust land and DNR land in general, and it was a good vehicle to bring that discussion forward. Or do you want a more honest answer? Representative Dill.
Well, I think it got covered, but the fact is that this is nothing more than an appropriation. A proposed appropriation to attempt to exercise one of the three legs of the constitutional requirements to buy the land, of which no one else is going to buy the land. No one is going to come in and buy land in a wildlife management area. They're not going to do it. So we did it to ourselves. This will provide an appropriation that possibly will cure some of the ills that we created here in the legislature as we work along and preserving land for future generations, and that's the reason I support the bill.
And Commissioner Meyer, isn't it even in some cases a boat landing with improvements on it? And I thought I remember in some of the tours up north, we actually took lunch at a boat landing that I thought was school trust land. Commissioner Meyer?
Mr. Chairman, members, I previously did state, and it's been published in other reports, there are 207 water access sites throughout the state that are located on trust fund land.
So is a water access site a boat landing?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman,
Representative Dill,
Well,
follow.
there's also, you know, in Captogama Lake, there's the Wooden Frog Campground, which is located on, and the DNR gets the revenue from the, as I recall, now maybe he'll correct me on that, but that's a state park where there's campers and there's a sewer system and there's, right on the edge of Lake Captogama overlooking Voyageurs National Park, and that's a school trust land. This would be the possibility under this legislation to condemn that, buy it out, and make it a different categorization and actually get the value out of it on a one-time basis.
Commissioner Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, members, revenue from state forest campgrounds on trust lands goes directly to the corpus.
Oh,
But
fine,
we've
thank you.
straightened some of those things out statutorily in the past.
Do you take off your cost of administering that?
Goes right into the corpus.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Representative Fabian, I think you have the last question that relates to Representative Lueck's bill, and then we may have a broader discussion about some land issues, if that works for folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Lueck, I want to be clear on, you know, we've had a little bit of a discussion about the school trust fund lands director not being appointed yet. But I guess what I'm curious to know, what is your intention in your bill as to how the director is going to become involved in this process?
Representative Lueck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The job description, I guess for lack of a better word, is, would be a principal that would be involved working with the administrative folks on executing this when it's necessary. So, and what's really important is that individual will be sharing with us, and when I say us, I'm talking about the School Lands Trust Commission, sharing with us that whole process, and if they need assistance from the commission, we'd be ready to do that. But this simply gives that individual, that position within the Department of Natural Resources, and with a direct link, obviously, to the governor, to focus directly on those types of things. And this, I say, we would hope this wouldn't be everything he does, but this, or she, but this would be one that would be very important. Basically puts a tool, a clear tool, right in that tool bag for that individual.
Representative Fabian, follow up? I'm good. You're good. Is anybody in the public, Mr. Arnosti, are you wanting to speak to this? No. Representative Dietrich, are you wanting to speak to this? Ms. Dietrich, if you could come down and identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Denise Dietrich, and I'm here with the Minnesota School Boards Association. And first of all, I want to welcome Representative Lueck to the School Trust Lands Commission. It's nice to have him on the commission now. I just want to go on record as saying that the Minnesota School Boards Association supports this bill. This is a really important bill that the school education groups and the environmental groups can get behind, and for a lot of the reasons that we just talked about. But I do want to bring up just a couple of points that were addressed, and that is that this land that is held and for potential sale, that all this land is school trust lands. And what has happened is that the DNR has come and laid over a designation to this land that it cannot generate revenue. And that is the way that it should be. This land, it's highly sensitive land in our state. It contributes to the quality of life and to the environmental climate in this state, and it should not be used for anything. But we all know that when land is held in trust, it needs to become productive. That is a trust obligation. And so it is our duty to make sure that the land that we own is productive. And with this land, the best solution is probably a outright sale. And if some of you might not have read it, but in the 1998 legislative audit report, they actually stated that the state should be buying out all of this land, because letting it sit in trust with these designations is in breach of trust. So in the past, there has not been that much attention paid to this issue, and years have just gone on, and we designate more school trust lands with highly sensitive categories. And that has created all of, a couple of years ago in 2012, the legislature passed a bipartisan bill that said actually that this land needed to be purchased by 2018. And so that is in statute right now. And if we are going to meet that legal obligation, we need to start buying that land now. As was mentioned by the representative, that it has been, the land with those designations has been valued at about $85 million. So do the math, 20 million now, it is still going to be a while before we are able to purchase that land from the trust. And so we greatly appreciate any effort of moving forward on this issue. It is a decades-old issue, and we just really appreciate you taking a second look at it. And then if I may just add one other thing, this topic was mentioned earlier, and this is why we need a director position. We need a director who can identify this issue and just continue to move forward on it on a daily basis, day in and day out on behalf of the children. And I just want to also mention, with that director position, there is no way that they are just going to take a whole clump of land and just say, let's sell all this for $20 million. They need to be very cognizant of the fact that they are to be making short-term and long-term decisions on the trust lands, and that they should be taking each acre one by one and evaluating what should happen with that piece of land, and also taking the advice of many others.
Thank you. Representative Hansen, you have the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Dietrich. Looking back at, I think I heard you say 85 million by 2018. Is that correct?
Representative
Yes.
Dietrich.
Yes.
And so,
Representative Hansen.
Mr. Chair, we have, apparently there's no urgency for capital investment this year, so then we're into 2016, so we'd have to find 85 million in 2 years. Am I correct in that?
Ms. Dietrich. No comment?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hansen, yes, that is correct. But, when I have testified on many of these bills already in previous years, and like I mentioned, this has been going on for decades, and I always used to close my statements with, don't anybody hold your breath. We have seen many bills like this already. So, you know what? Any progress, and at least get the ball rolling, would be greatly beneficial.
That sounded like a closing comments. Representative Lueck, anything to add?
Only would request that you support this bill, Mr. Chair. And
Thank you.
members, thank you.
Appreciate you being brief, Representative Lueck. House File 1096 is laid over for possible inclusion at a much later date. Ms. Lewis, it seems like we have a number of questions around DNR land. If you would be we would welcome Ms. Lewis. We're only going to spend a few minutes, folks, but I did want to tee up. Ms. Lewis, could you give us an overview of where it's been at with DNR land ownership, school trust land, other lands are owned by different entities? If you and Mr. Meyer could just walk through the whole thing. And then how successful has DNR been? I know there's been a couple of previous attempts by former Representative Seifert to sell excess DNR property, and generally speaking, if I remember, we came back over and over again to extend those and give extensions, and I'm not real interested in creating a situation that doesn't work, but I hear from my northern colleagues especially that we have excess land that DNR should be selling and getting in the hands of private property owners where it doesn't work for DNR to own it any longer. And then if you could also touch on, we have some lands that we don't even legally have the ability to sell, and we shouldn't because they were bought for a dedicated purpose. I know that's a lot, but I know you know it all, and we need to hear some of that in this committee because we have a number of new members. Welcome, Ms. Lewis. If you could identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Kathy Lewis, Assistant Director, Lands and Minerals Division, Department of Natural Resources. The department administers 5.6 million acres of state-owned land. 2.5 million acres of that is school trust. 1.5 million acres is consolidated conservation area land. The remainder of the land is basically acquired land that was purchased or gifted or county board resolution to the DNR. The process that we have is most of that land is administered by the different divisions of the department. The forestry is the largest administrator of the state-owned lands. But we have designated management units under the outdoor recreation system. So there's state parks, state trails, state forest, water access sites, scientific and natural areas, the large opportunities for recreational use. The department has an acquisition program that's funded through several means. The LCCMR and the Sarge Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council funding is providing funding. Also through the Outdoor Heritage funding, money's going to third parties, and they turn around and donate the land to the DNR for management. We also occasionally get bonding dollars in general fund. As to land sales, we have a regular land sale program. We offer lands for primarily through public auction. Tomorrow you'll have the bill with the omnibus lands bill that will come before you, and that will also have some direct sales. We come to the legislature with direct sales each year too. For example, in calendar year 14, we had 2 land sales. We offered 10 parcels in August, and most of those were in Kitson County. It was part of a strategic land asset management effort with the county. And out of those 10 parcels, 7 of them sold. And in October 2014, we offered 27 parcels for sale. 13 of them were lakeshore. 1 of them was an island in Lake Vermilion. We did sell an island on Bear Island Lake. The island in Lake Vermilion did not sell. Most of those were trust fund parcels in the October sale. So overall, we do that. The revenue from the school trust land goes to the corpus of the school trust. We sell university trust land, that goes to the corpus of the permanent university fund. The acquired land, when we sell it, goes to the land acquisition account. It's available for the DNR to acquire other lands within the outdoor recreation unit. And we also have some consolidated conservation area lands. Occasionally, we have authority to sell those. That revenue split 50% to the counties and 50% to the general fund. You asked about past directions to have land sales. There's been, in the last decade, 2 laws that required state agencies to sell land to help balance the budget. There was first the $5.505 million requirement, and that was primarily met with the sale of the BCA building, but the DNR also contributed through the sale of land. And then there was the requirement for state agencies to sell $6.44 million of land. That one, the agencies had difficulty meeting, and it was extended over at least 2 bienniums. The DNR did sell a lot of land that was contributed to that. The total was actually not met, and the bill provided that when it was not met by the end of a biennium, that the remainder would come out of the budgets of the agencies, and that was finally done, and the law sunset in that provision. Now, that's a real quick nutshell. What else would you like me to cover, Mr. Chair?
Well, Ms. Lewis, can you touch on how the legislature could help the DNR? You have some hurdles, and there are some legislative hurdles that impede your ability to sell and exchange land, where I think sometimes you see that it would make sense to allow people to maybe bid or to sell or buy property. And what are some of the restrictions on DNR that you run into challenges when you're trying to sell excess property?
Mr. Chair, members, the one of the issues is the statutes require us to do appraised value. And in the bill you'll see tomorrow, there's a provision to allow us to sell a particular parcel for less than appraised value because we've been unable to sell it at appraised value. So that's one of the issues. School trust lands always have to be sold by public sale under the Constitution or the condemnation or the exchange. So that's a constitutional issue that we aren't looking to change. Those are the basic issues that we have is the appraised value. There is process required, but we can work through that. For acquired lands, we have to give state agencies the first opportunity, and then local units of government have the right to purchase at the appraised value before we offer to the public. But we work through those.
And Ms. Lewis, I can think of a couple of high-value DNR properties. One of them is on the edge of Hastings, a community I live in Ravenna Township, surrounded by the city on three sides, flat, probably prime development property that the state has tried to market at different times. A former WMA that was, if I remember right, gifted with the former state hospital in Hastings. So I think it's land that is eligible to be sold and probably makes sense to be sold. And then you also have the former, was it the Regent site on the east side of Rochester that I think you still have a building there, but it's probably also something that either has an interest from the city or potentially developers. I think arguably both those properties are in value of excess of $1 million. What are the hurdles you have on selling those type of lands, those two particular properties?
Mr. Chair, members, the Dakota County parcels have been offered for sale. They have been also reduced in value with new appraisals. One of the challenges we face in that one is that while it's on the edge of Hastings, it's actually in Marchand Township and has different zoning standards. A developer would have to come in and get variances to have a more condensed housing. So one of the challenges everybody has in the real estate market these days is finding buyers for certain pieces of property because people are still looking for bargains and we're selling at appraised value. And so that's one of the challenges. The Rochester property has been a piece of property that we've been selling in pieces over the years. We sold some of the portion of the property to the county for over $1 million. We've conveyed part of the property to the college system. We've conveyed part of the property to the city for an area for a park. So we've been breaking it up over the years. There's a small portion left. And we have an office building on the site, and we're working on the issues of what do we want to do for relocating those employees over time and the cost for doing that. So that's one of the issues of balancing out movement of employees and office space and the economics of doing that.
And Ms. Lewis, how about in northern Minnesota? What could we do to speed up the opportunity? I know you have a somewhat aggressive, supposedly, plan with the counties to do some exchanging. And then don't you run into some challenges in northern Minnesota when you have to do some checking for Native American artifacts? I don't know if I'm using the right word then. And then how about special endangered species and stuff? Do they come into the conversation and your ability just to sell land? Do you have to note some of those things, and why would that be? Can't the new owner do whatever would need to be to... Myself, I think it would really neat to own an island somewhere with the Native American artifacts we used to see on the edges of the cliffs when we were canoeing. I think that'd be cool to own one of those. And is that not allowed under law, or what, Ms. Lewis?
Mr. Chair, a part of the process with the school trust lands is to be identifying properties for sale. And we identified some properties on Lake Vermilion to sell. What we have to do under the state law is the Minnesota Historical Society looks at whether there's suspected or known archaeological sites. And Lake Vermilion is an area with a lot of Indian activity in the past. So for the island that we offered, we had to have an inspection by an archaeologist, and it was cleared for offering. But there's another island there that when they inspected it, they found a spear point that was 10,000 years old, and it needs more study by the archaeologist before we can work through the process of selling that property. We also have an ongoing program, as you mentioned, a strategic land asset management program that is working with the counties to identify parcels to sell or exchange. In Roseau County, for example, we ended up with land sales. But we do have exchange projects going on in Aiken and Lake and St. Louis and Knabec. We also are having a project where we're looking at small isolated parcels throughout the state and looking at potential of offering some of those for sale. And that's part of the regional meetings that are ongoing just this month and into April.
Well, thank you, Ms. Lewis. And I don't see any other questions, but I wanted you to come forward just to explain, and now that I said there was no questions, a couple of hands are popping up, including, but I want you to be available as a resource, and if you could, I'm not interested in selling land that we shouldn't sell, but I hear over and over with our aggressive land purchases in southern Minnesota, please evaluate if there's lands that we should be selling strategically. Landlocked property that the public has no access to. Representative Fabian and I were looking at a map of one of the northern counties last night, and we see these, 40s and 80s that there's no access for the public to, and it seems just like a no-brainer. I know maybe the appraisal is not realistic of what the value is, but it just doesn't seem to make sense that we continue to have those in ownership. So, I mean, you can't even get into log them, I'd imagine. It's a real challenge. Commissioner Myers.
Mr. Chairman, just on that note, one of the challenges that we need to put on the table as well is the cost of doing these transactions. Appraisals, as you said, doing survey work, closing costs, which are shared through the transaction, but we need some upfront money to do some of these things as well. Representative Fabian and I are discussing an exchange with a constituent that, frankly, the survey costs and the title work is more than the property's worth almost. So we need to figure out how do we do some of those things as well, and we can discuss that as well. How can we work together to help us work with constituents and also sell land? And one of the things, the outcomes of those forced land sales from past several years ago, we were selling land, little bits of land that we would normally convey to a local unit of government for $1 or more. I remember one was a piece of land in Wayzata that became very consensuous because we were trying to get what the money was actually worth, $150,000, $200,000 for a piece of land about as big as this room, because we needed to put that money into the general fund. So there were ramifications from that, and there was a law that was passed that prohibited us from selling basically any of the outdoor units, any of the outdoor recreational units to balance the general fund. So that law is still on the books. And I appreciate your comment that you're not looking to sell those types of lands, but looking at what we would call surplus lands and how do we get some of those more on the market. So we would love to work with you on trying to figure out how to do that.
We look forward to that. A couple of announcements, members. We are going to, if you're here, I don't know if anyone's here, Mr. Showalter maybe, or not Showalter, I'm sorry. Jerry, are you here for the truck wash? Okay, we're not going to hear Representative Fabian's 1161 today. We'll move that till Thursday, and then we'll, I think the only other, we'll do Representative Dill's next, and then if we get to Representative Torkelson's, hopefully we will, just to let people know this has gone on a little bit longer, but it was good discussion. I have a couple more questions. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Lewis. And Commissioner Meyer just referenced this, but I think we've had a long history of looking at these sales, and maybe my memory's wrong, but we had the 2003, 2004 session to sell land to balance the budget, and that took, I mean, are we still trying to sell that to balance the 03, 04 budget, or did we take care of that a couple years ago? What could you maybe give some history on that?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Lewis.
Representative Hansen, that was the reference I had to the 6.44 million requirement for state agencies to sell land, and the DNR participated and sold quite a few parcels. The former Jackson WMA and Stillwater is an example. The legislation was reenacted for several years because the state agencies were not meeting the requirement. It got close to $6 million, and at that point, the bill provided that if it wasn't renewed, the state agencies had to absorb the difference out of their budget, and that the DNR was tapped for part of that too, and so that bill sunset at that point, so it's not a requirement any longer on the books.
Follow-up, Representative Hansen.
And Mr. Chair and Ms. Lewis, so, and that journey took us through, I think, what Commissioner Meyer was referencing, the bill to prohibit some sales, but we also had legislation to facilitate that, to sell at below appraised value in order to accomplish that liquidation. Is my memory correct on that?
Ms. Lewis?
Mr. Chair, Representative Hanson, yes, there was both the provision that the DNR could not sell property within the outdoor recreation system to meet the general fund requirement, and there's also a provision that the DNR is allowed to sell some parcels up to 25% off appraised value in order to help meet that requirement.
Follow-up, Representative Hanson.
And Mr. Chair, and to the testifiers, so whenever we start on this, particularly if it's any issue to resolve budget issues or to liquidate public assets, I mean, if my memory is correct, that took about 10 years to go through this for $6 million. And we've heard continuously today and before about purchasing and the thirst for purchasing public lands. And I think maybe, Mr. Chair, you misspoke about the aggressive land purchases in southern Minnesota. I don't think there's been aggressive land purchases in southern Minnesota or even in the metro area. And I think there is public desire to add to the recreation system, whether it's parks and trails or whether it's scientific and natural areas or whether it's wildlife management areas in the southern part or in the non-conifer part of the state. And so I think that I understand Representative Dill and other folks' concerns in the northern part of the state, but the state is very diverse, and it would seem there'd be some way to balance out this, where there are people who want some of the land acquisitions, and there's the opportunity for contiguous, and there's an opportunity for connecting either on trails or within the system, whether it's the outdoor recreation system or the parks and trail system, to make some of that, because there are willing sellers everywhere in the state. So the prioritization, and maybe that's the land asset management system that you've developed to say, where is the best priority? Where can we make that? And then we have to have the opportunity to appropriate the money to make that happen. Is that what's happening, or?
Mr.
I
Chair,
think, Representative Hanson, you did a good job of wrapping up just where we're at. If you want to give a
I
final
just want
comment.
to say
Commissioner
exactly,
Meyer.
that's where we're at, strategic land asset management, implementing the prairie plan, looking at those ways, but we also need to have a discussion after break about how do we pay those real estate management costs as well, because that's one of the biggest barriers we have to do this work. It's not, we don't want to do it, it's not, we don't have land we can liquidate. It's paying for those costs and getting it done the right way.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Lewis, for coming in. Mr. Meyer, thank you, Commissioner. Next, let's do Representative Dill. Why don't we do your 1410? I know there's some testifiers here, and I would like to get through Representative Torkelson's bill also today if we could. Representative Dill, I think we need to actually move this bill on to taxes, if I remember right. Representative Dill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman McNamara, members. I'd like to move the House File 1410 to be passed and referred to the Taxes Committee.
Welcome. Go ahead with your testimony. I think you have an amendment, Representative Dill.
The A1 amendment, I'd like to move the A1 amendment, and I'll briefly describe the A1 amendment. One of the things that's prohibited in rule by the Department of Revenue is the allowance of a paved trail on any enrolled land, and that certainly makes sense. However, in the case up north, there's a large landowner, RGGS, that is willing to grant an easement to the Masaba Trail, which runs from the Mississippi River all the way up to Ely, eventually to Ely. And this is actually meets some of the requirements in the Sustainable Forest Initiative Act to increase public access. So what this does is very finitely allows for a landowner like RGGS to allow a paved trail and not remove the balance of the land from the SFIA program. The land where the easement would be removed, but not the land, the thousands of acres beyond that. So that's what the amendment does, and I'd like support for the amendment to get the bill in the shape that I'd like it.
Discussion to the A1. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment's adopted. Representative Dill, any more to explain your bill before we hear from the testifiers?
Well, actually, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just give a brief summary of how we got to where we're at, if that suits the chairman. This bill, the Sustainable Forest Initiative Act, began in 2001 when Representative Howes passed the bill into law and made the first appropriations to pay for land that would have covenants placed upon it for 8 years and would promote forestry, ecological protections, and recreational access. The plan, I'm going to call it SFIA instead of Sustainable Forest Initiative to shorten it up so everyone knows what the acronym is. The SFIA program required that it have a forest management plan. And so I think it's interesting that with the governor's proposal for the 50-foot buffer, we have about 800,000 acres that have forest management plans that are certified lands, the timber is certified, the management is certified, and in a lot of cases up north where this massive tracts of lands are, they will very likely meet all of the requirements in the governor's legislation for buffers on streams and riparian areas, et cetera. The objective, as I said, was for environmental, recreation, and commercial values. There is the 2014 appropriation to support the entire program, which included 750,000 acres enrolled in the program, was $5,273,000 for the enrolled acres. Frankly, it's done a good job, but the bill before you, members, comes from the legislative auditor. Representative Hansen and others made a good move. Whenever we establish a program, we always need to have a look back and see how we're doing along the way. And sometimes that's painful, and sometimes it's not so painful. And actually, I don't believe it's very painful at this point because the recommendations of the auditor were really good. And so they recommended some amendments to the program. We had created a working group here in 2011 to look at what possible amendments there might be to include all of the goals and aspirations of the program, which covered both organizations, industrial and non-industrial forest landowners, and people who were interested in public access and ecological and conservation purposes. The group came together, and the legislative auditor made their report that got us to the bill that's before you as amended. And I'll just quickly go through a few of the things that are included in the bill. First off, Mr. Chairman, there is a fiscal note on the bill, but it's all general fund implications. It doesn't come out of the environment target, and so taxes would deal with the fiscal note. So if there's any questions on the fiscal note, what I'd like to do is to, I will answer them, but I'd like to just let that pass on through to the tax committee because it'll be Senator Skoye and Representative Davids that will be working on this document on the fiscal note. But it's all general fund impacts, and this program is funded from a general fund appropriation, the $5,700,000.
Any questions for Representative Dill on the fiscal note that'll be discussed in taxes? Seeing none, go ahead, Representative Dill.
Okay, so looking at what the auditor said in his recommendations, that the legislature should tie the sustainable forest payments more directly to the SFIA goals. And so we used current law and added specificity for the benefits and its characteristics and to make this an incentive program rather than a tax program. Now, I would think that we would have that appropriation in the environment target rather than the tax target, but it's just staying that way because it's a general fund appropriation. If you want to find the language that does that, it also moves some of the duties from the commissioner of some of the duties it switched them between, depending on what they were, between the Commissioner of Natural Resources and the Department of Revenue. Generally, the Department of Revenue handled almost all of this, and now it's balancing out the right things to do. In other words, the Department of Revenue is going to do the right things. Of course, they handle the money, right? They certify who gets the payments, how much, so on and so forth. The Department of Natural Resources will make sure that the forest management plan is in place, it's valid, they validated it, they will monitor it, they will report to the county what is happening on the landscape so that they can be aware of it. So that was the first item. The management plan, as I said, should be registered with the DNR. That was another part of the auditor's report. Then the annual certification. You'll find that language on 4.30 through 5.10. The length of the covenant, that remains unchanged. It's still 8 years in the bill. It was 8 years at the outset in 2001. The payments now are remaining unchanged in the bill, and they were in 2013 established, 2013 or 12, I think it was 13, established at $7 an acre. Also, members, for those who are new, there was Governor Plenty in an effort to try and save some money. It's a good size appropriation, $5.7 million a year. In order to save some money, you have large landowners, one particularly Mulpus Land Management, Timber Management. They had many hundreds of thousands of acres enrolled, and so they were getting a significant amount of money. The governor capped it at $100,000 as your maximum payment. Well, that pretty much undid what our agreement was when we first passed the bill. But it was a money-saving issue. I didn't agree with it. Many of us here in this committee didn't agree with it, but we did it. And now that was reversed. The next item was oversight. They needed to increase the language in the bill, and the agencies needed to increase verification or claims that because we had limited oversight and we weren't making sure that we were getting the outcomes, Representative Fabian, that we needed for the payments that we were giving. And so you will find that language on line 3.10. Transfer of ownership, just like the amendment that we just did, we didn't transfer ownership, but we made it. We've made changes in the bill, line 6.33 to line 7.30, that make it so that the program is workable, because every program, as we put it in stone and we put it in law, we come up, because of what Representative Hansen said, the state is so diverse and there are so many needs and requirements for all the different things, public access, paved trails, this, that, or the other, or transfer of ownership between one owner to the next owner, and how the payments will proceed into the future, that was addressed and in the language on line 6.33 through 7.30. Removal of property for tax delinquency. Another problem. People didn't pay their taxes, but they got the payments. Well, that isn't quite fair, right? I mean, we pay them to... so that problem is addressed in line 5.30 through 6.7. Withdrawal procedures, we should consider revising the covenant restrictions on withdrawal. That doesn't change in the bill. That was a recommendation of the legislative auditor. That isn't changed in the bill. Penalties for removal, expand the penalty options and increase penalties that, for those who develop their land that are in SFIA. Well, that goes against the idea of the SFIA covenants in the first place. So if you look in line 7.32 through 8.20, you'll find that there's a 25% of estimated market value, and in other areas where there's more intensive development, a 30% against the entire property, a chargeback to the SFIA benefits. Then I just want to also mention, members, that there's small landowners here, 20 acres. People with 20 acres can come into this program. I have 160 up in Coochin County. I'm not in the program. It would make sense to go in the program, but I just haven't bothered. I don't want to. I don't want to increase spending, Mr. Chairman. I just like.
Good for you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
But
we appreciate that.
Outcome.
You're helping Representative Davids. You're not helping us.
So, Mr. Chairman, I do want to mention and thank, frankly, the landowners. I want to thank all the landowners for participating in this, particularly the ones that have made it a point to file forest stewardship plans, go through the process, follow the program, and do it right. The reasons for these changes are the things that weren't right or needed mid-course corrections between 2001 and 2015. And I want to also tell you about the thing that is so good for the folks in our state, that any person, entity, or company that has over 1,920 acres in aggregate has to have their land open for non-motorized recreation or motorized recreation, like hunting, fishing, hiking, birding, those types of things, unposted and free to open to the public because of their size of the number of acres. This includes Blandon, Potlatch, Mulpus Timber Company, Merriweather Timber Company, private people who have over 1,920 acres. It allows for when there are designated snowmobile trails or ATV trails that can continue on forward. It's a great public access, and I want to throw in the last thing, the last thing about this metro versus rural. Not that we ever do that in this committee, but You know, I'm thinking about Cooching County and the fact that nobody in Cooching County needs this program for any recreational purposes, really, because everyone knows where to go hunt and fish. But we need it for forest stewardship, because we feed our mills, which feed this place with copy papers. But the people down here need it for public access and recreational benefit, because they go up there and here's this huge landscape, no trespassing, no signs of any kind. They don't know where to go. You know, it's hard. And so that's the value of the program. And so I gave you a great overview, I think it was a great overview of the whole program, the bill, and all its wonderful changes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I saw you going like this.
Well, Representative Dill, you might have done just what we needed, because I'm not sure how much the testifiers need to add. So I assume their testimony, I have 4 of them, is going to be rather short. Mr. Hibbard from Minnesota Forest Resource Council, you want to come forward first? And then we have the Minnesota Forestry Association is on deck. Welcome, good morning. Mr. Hibbard, am I correct? Isn't it Dr. Hibbard? For some reason, I'm thinking that.
I usually don't put that on there.
I know you don't, but you earned it. Dr. Hibbard, if you could identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Sure, Mr. Chair, committee members, my name's Calder Hibbard. I'm the policy analyst for the Minnesota Forest Resources Council. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I can keep it real brief because Representative Dill covered just about everything I was going to. We believe that this is an important program. These lands enrolled in this program provide the state with timber supply, jobs, other forest products, hunting and other recreational activities, wildlife habitat, and protection of water quality, to name a few. As Representative Dill mentioned, the stakeholder group put together last year to respond to the auditors met a number of times over the past year, developed a set of recommendations to address the SFIA audit from the Legislative Auditor's Office. House File 1410 addresses both the recommendations from the Legislative Auditor's Office as well as the responses from the stakeholder group going forward. Last week, the Minnesota Forest Resources Council unanimously passed an endorsement of these bills, 12-0. There should be a one-pager in your packet there describing that resolution as well as the different disparate interests around forestry that we represent. The resolution supported the passage of legislation by the 2015 Minnesota Legislature that improves the SFIA program by addressing the recommendations of the Office of the Legislative Auditor and the SFIA's stakeholder group. With that, I'll...
Thank you, Dr. Hibbard. See no questions, great job, thank you. Mr. Zumbalin, I'm sorry, I walked all over it, but go ahead. If you could identify yourself for the record and give us your correct pronunciation and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bruce Zumbalin, Chair of the Government Relations Committee with the Minnesota Forestry Association, the oldest conservation organization in the state, founded in 1876 to promote stewardship of Minnesota's forests. Our mission today is to encourage the retention and sustainable management of family-owned woodlands, which are often most threatened by development and where many landowners lack the knowledge on woodland management. The SFIA is very important in supporting that goal. I speak for the nearly 2,300 small woodland owners enrolled in the SFIA that have committed to managing their property under a management plan and recorded a covenant on the title to protect it from being development. Without the SFIA's annual incentive, a number of owners have told me that they could not afford or improve or maintain their woodlands. This bill addresses key findings and recommendations of the 2013 Legislative Auditor's critical evaluation of the SFIA. Our organization thought that the auditor's evaluation was a very fair assessment of the program. It wasn't much of a surprise to us because our organization was aware of the problems with the SFIA before that evaluation. As a matter of fact, we welcomed the auditor's evaluation, hoping it would bolster our efforts to address a number of the very same issues we tried to pursue in the 2011 legislative session with House File 1221, a bill authored by former Representative Larry Howells. So we are pleased to see House File 1410 address the auditor's key recommendations and much of what we tried to accomplish in the 2011 session. So this bill, upon passage, will help to continue to keep Minnesota's private forest lands as forest. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your testimony. Seeing no questions. Mr. Brandt, do you want to come next, I think? And then the only one I have left is Deputy Director Schmidt or Director Bowe. I don't know which one he, okay. Mr. Brandt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wayne Brandt, Minnesota Forest Industries. We support Representative Dill's bill. We seek to continually have this program be improved, to be more robust, to address the issues of parcelization and improve the benefits provided to the public and the environment. Just to make one point on top of one of Representative Dill's points when he talked about what a good deal this is in terms of the public access. My members are some of the primary ones that provide through this program the public access. The payment that is received is $7. If you look at private transactions and research conducted by the University of Minnesota, College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, out in the open market, that access, which we're getting through this program for $7 an acre, goes for anywhere from $11 to $50 an acre. So it's an incredible deal with the large landowners for the public for that access. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brandt. And just an FYI, I talked with one of your members this morning from Big Fork, and he was thankful. Evidently, Representative Dill, it's been cold enough up north the last couple days for him to get an important 350 cords out of the woods while the ground was still frozen. So
Mr. Chairman,
it's interesting to hear what's going on up north.
Mr. Chairman, we always like to get the wood out of the woods when the ground is frozen instead of leaving it in the mud for the next winter.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
thank you. And Director Schmidt, if you want to come forward and give us your testimony, and then after you do that, I think Representative Dill has an oral amendment, and then we'll be on our way.
Thank you,
Director,
Mr. Chair.
welcome. If you could identify yourself for the record.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Craig Schmidt. I am the Deputy Director of the DNR Forestry Division. We also support this bill. In the earlier part of my career, I was actually the private management forester in Baudette, Minnesota, so I've written dozens of stewardship plans for landowners who participate in the program, but more importantly, probably hundreds, if not thousands of acres of project plans for those people where they were planting trees, harvesting timber, doing other things to improve their lands, and this bill certainly supports those efforts. We recognize that the transfer of administration from the Department of Revenue to DNR has some implications for us. As Representative Dill points out, we've submitted a fiscal note and ask that as the bill moves forward, we look for a reliable and stable funding to fulfill those obligations. I do want to mention monitoring in the bill. The legislative auditor points out, and we agree, that for the long-term integrity of the program, it's important that we are certain that what's happening out there on the landscape is what the people are paying for through these incentives. The bill does have a monitoring component where enrollees will report annually the management practices that have taken place on their land, and it would be our responsibility to monitor that. I think moving forward, we think there's probably a need somewhere along the line to have boots on the ground looking at what's happening to these properties. We're very kind of uniquely suited to do that work. We monitor a number of things, including forest management guidelines, and this could simply be an extension of that work for future thought. That's about all I have to add.
Thank you, Director. And actually, I have to apologize. Representative Hansen, I've been paying a little too much attention to young Heinzman here, Jane Heinzman, and she borrowed my pen to play tic-tac-toe, and I forgot to write down that you had a question, and I don't know if it was for Mr. Brandt or not. So, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it was, but that's okay. I think he's, Representative Dill and to the DNR, do you believe with these changes that we will get more sustainable forestry, we'll actually get practices on the ground, that the outcome is going to be what the intent of the bill was?
Representative Dill.
Thank you, and thank you, Representative Hansen. Yeah, I think the answer is yes, because I believe that there are things that happened out after the program was enrolled. These things happen where we don't have the monitoring. Going to what he said, I hate that's the Bob Meyer word, boots on the ground, but Commissioner Meyer, boots on the ground. But I mean, we really have to. If we're going to have a program, of this magnitude, you have to have monitoring. I think that there are things that fell through the crack on the way to the party here today, and those things we'll be working at to try and fix. And so the answer is yes. And then the second answer to that is yes. We'll know that it's a sustainable thing. We'll know that it's meeting the requirements of ecological reasons, for forest protection and forest management reasons, and for ecological reasons. So I think the answer is win-win-win. How's that? God, not a win-win, but.
A triple win.
Okay, thank you. I don't, you have an oral amendment, but is there anybody in the audience who wants to speak for or against the bill? Anybody in the audience to speak for or against the bill? Representative Dill, do you want to move I think you have a small oral amendment? And
I
then
do have an oral amendment, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move the oral amendment and have Ms. Taylor read it. It's on line 1.21 in the bill, first page.
On the first page of the bill, Ms. Taylor.
Mr. Chair, members, the amendment would read on line 1.21, delete the second and insert a comma, and then after ecological, insert comma and recreational.
So,
it
Mr.
read-
Chairman, that makes it consistent throughout the bill of what the goals are.
Thank you. Any questions on the amendment? All those in favor of the Dill oral amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The oral amendment's adopted. Representative Dill, do you want to renew your motion?
I would like to renew my motion to House File 1410 as amended be repassed and re-referred to the Taxes Committee.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Representative Dill, you're on to taxes. I believe Representative Torkelson, you might have
Mr. Chair,
the,
one more thing on this.
Representative Dill.
There is a Torkelson bill that has to do with SFIA. We heard it a few days ago, and I expect that we will have, these bills will collide in the Tax Committee, and all of the details will be worked out between them. I think that we're both working towards the same goal.
Okay, so that's a tax issue, and thanks for that information. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House File 1327 is a bill to help fund our SWCDs. I have a DE1 amendment. I'd like to move the bill for possible inclusion in your omnibus bill.
Thank you. What Representative Torkelson, go ahead with your testimony.
I'd like to go ahead and get the bill in the shape I'd like it to be in by moving the DE1 amendment, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Representative Torkelson. Oh, you got to move the amendment, DE1. Sorry, I was trying to do two things. And that's not even with Lil Heinzman, so sorry, I apologize. Where are we?
Thank you. The DE1, I would move the DE1.
Oh, you already moved it. Discussion to the DE1 to get the bill in the shape the author would like. Not seeing any, I'm sorry, Representative Hornstein.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So is the $11 million, Representative Torkelson, that you have in this, the amendment, is this the entire appropriation? Is it an additional to the $8 million that we had in the past for this?
This is
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, it's $11 million each year for 2 years. It's additional funding.
So, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hornstein.
Mr. Chair and Representative Torkelson, in other words, this is new money then, in addition to what we've had in the past?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I believe it is, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Horn, okay, thank you. To the DE1, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The DE1 is adopted.
Mr. Chair, I also have a small oral correction to the DE1, and I believe Ms. Taylor will explain.
Ms. Taylor.
Mr. Chair, members, the amendment would read on line 1.10, delete district and insert county.
And Ms. Taylor, that'll now be to the bill because we already adopted the DE1, right?
Yeah, it would be to the bill, since the DE1 is now the bill.
Okay. Any questions to the Torkelson oral amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Representative Torkelson, is your bill now in the shape you want to discuss it?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
This bill actually addresses a very important issue in the state of Minnesota, and that is funding our SWCDs right now. There's some unevenness across the state. This bill not only supplies some base funding to SWCDs, additional base funding, but also encourages counties to participate in the funding of SWCDs. In the interest of time, I will cut my testimony short, and I have a testifier, Mr. Chair, who is ready to enlighten us.
Thank you, Mr. Representative Torkelson. Proceed with your testimony. Please identify yourself for the record.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Ian Cunningham, and I serve as president of the Minnesota Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. I'm also an locally elected board member for the Pipestone SWCD. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on House File 1327, I'd especially like to thank Representative Torkelson for his support and his work on the bill. Mr. Chair, I'd like to begin my comments with a very brief background on SWCDs and then get into the fiscal issues that we are facing, and finally how this bill addresses those issues through a general funds appropriation. Minnesota SWCDs are a special purpose local units of state government established under state law Minnesota statute, chapter 103C, to carry out conservation programs at the local level. SWCDs are unique in their work. They work with local private landowners to help them manage and protect land and water resources on all private land. Each SWCD has a 5-member locally elected board of supervisors to set policies, provide local input, and ensure oversight and accountability for the districts. SWCDs provide tremendous state benefits, some seen, some unseen. Structural conservation practices are easy to see. Not so easy to see are the important management practices that SWCDs implement. Regardless of whether you see it or not, SWCD's work is critical in making sure that all Minnesotans benefit from the protection of our soils, lakes, streams, and rivers. None of our work is automatic or accidental. It must be planned for, promoted, funded, and installed every day across the state in cooperation with landowners and managers. As our state's soil and water resources face greater threats, the demand on SWCDs grows greater, and we are the local implementers to make sure our state stays on track with state and federal conservation programs. While the need has grown, it has not been coupled with the funding necessary to meet that need, which is why we are here before you today. Current SWCD funding falls short of providing necessary resources to meet our statutory obligations. Many SWCDs face volatility in their day-to-day operations due to varied funding at the county level and insufficient state resources. State resources that are available are mostly competitive in nature and directed at projects and practices rather than the people and the expertise and the relationships that it takes to make those projects happen. It creates an inadequate patchwork that severely limits our ability to meet these established state and local priorities for managing our soil and water. Recognizing trouble was on the horizon, our association convened an internal task force to look at SWCD funding issues and how we might solve them. We conducted outreach with various stakeholders, including organizations representing farmers, environmentalists, wildlife groups, and the business community, as well as state and federal agency and other local units of government. Input received through this outreach reflected the shared recognition of the value of SWCDs and the need for additional funding. Then we set out to actually quantify the funding need. An analysis by the Board of Soil and Water Resources calculated the shortfall in local conservation delivery capacity at $22 million per year across all SWCDs in the state. The bill before you provides $11 million per year in state funding to SWCDs in amounts that recognize the current county appropriation to the SWCD, providing an incentive but not mandating counties to contribute more to the SWCDs. This appropriation raises the lowest 1/3 of SWCDs to a level closer to adequate local capacity while providing additional state support to higher performing SWCDs. It recognizes the current county funding, which is approximately $9.8 million, as a match while providing an incentive for counties to do more. This additional state investment will allow SWCDs to better meet technical capacity needs and stay up to date with emerging conservation practices, provide resources to protect, enhance, and restore water quality in lakes and rivers, and protect groundwater from degradation. Build a solid base for key state and federal programs and enhance opportunities to leverage federal conservation resources. This bill would stabilize funding so SWCDs can attract and retain quality soil and water resource professionals who assist landowners in conservation practices. And I'm a farmer myself, and even my small farm has millions of dollars worth of assets that are at risk to my management decisions. And I appreciate having a relationship with someone who has been around long enough so I can trust the advice that that I'm getting from them. A lot of SWCD's work is not so much tied to a practice as it is to the relationship and the trust between the SWCD technician and the landowner. And this bill would enhance Minnesota's quality of life through environmental, wildlife, and aesthetic benefits that come from conservation on private lands. Mr. Chair, committee members, again, thank you for your time and consideration today. Again, I want to thank Representative Torkelson for his support, and at this time, I would be glad to take questions.
Question. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Cunningham, so the 11 million, the current appropriation has money for what used to be called general services grants, and then you'd have money for cost share and then the natural resources block grants. So how do you, where is your need, or how does this bill address the, administration versus projects on the ground? Could you maybe flesh that out a little bit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hansen. Currently, the conservation delivery appropriation, I believe, is $1.76 million. Our local delivery is highly dependent on county levying on our behalf for our operating funds. There are also SWCDs that apply for competitive grants. And the downside of that is when you get a competitive grant, you need to increase your conservation delivery capacity. You hire a person who knows that their tenure in that job may only be a couple of years. So they don't set down roots in the community, and they probably are looking for other opportunities right away. This funding would help provide additional resources beyond the current conservation delivery resources, that we can provide this predictable funding so we can have conservation professionals that have relationships and are trusted with the people that it's their job to work with.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Cunningham. Well, that's part of my concern, is that this is a 2-year appropriation. So if you hire folks, there's no guarantee that they would get it beyond that. So you might be in the same box, but at a larger scale. Is that a concern? Or?
Mr. Cunningham.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hansen. Yes, this is a 2-year appropriation, but it would go to become a base appropriation for Bowser. And I realize that there's nothing certain about that, but it would be more certain than, for instance, getting money from Clean Water Fund that starts at 0 every funding cycle. So we feel that this would likely provide funding going forward.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and maybe to Mr. Hagemeyer, could you describe the base or what there is in Bowser? Because I'm not sure what we have as a definition there.
Mr. Hagemeyer.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, first off, the base for Bowser going into this current biennium is $12,641,000 per year. That gets split out between a few different riders, a couple of which have been mentioned here, and some goes to Bowser's operations within the agency. This bill, as it's written, doesn't state that it'd be one time, so it'd be included to the base, so it'd be an increase over base. Base does require a direct appropriation every biennium. So it's a calculated anticipated cost, it's in our budget, but does require a direct appropriation of that amount every biennium.
Representative Hansen.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and maybe my confusion looks at the target that came out yesterday, where we see cuts from the base and cuts from last year's spending. So I'm not sure how we get an $11 million increase when we have a $71 million cut or a $24 million cut from the base.
Any comment by anybody? Representative Torkelson, any other comments or wait a minute, is there anybody else want to testify for or against the bill? Anybody else want to comment on the bill? Any other testifiers? Representative Torkelson, do you want to make some final comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like members to note some of the other materials that are in their packets, letters of support for this bill from a wide range of groups interested in agriculture, groups that don't necessarily always partner together on ag issues, but there's a recognition that this work that SWCDs do all across the state of Minnesota is very important work, but the current funding is inadequate. This bill really represents an opportunity for state and county government to partner on funding these SWCDs without a mandate, but what does encourage counties to take a more active role. We mentioned earlier the grant situation. We do supply a lot of funding to SWCDs through grant programs, but those grant programs tend to reward the successful active SWCDs and in a way kind of penalize the ones that aren't so active or maybe don't have the staff to be able to write the grants. And in fact, the demand for grants far exceeds the capacity. So this is an attempt to really kind of balance this out across the state of Minnesota in a way that will get some important work done. It seems like there's always interest in doing more work all across the state. This focuses the facilitation for that work on a local basis, which I believe can be the most successful. Mr. Cunningham described the important relationship between landowners and trusted SWCD employees. With that, Mr. Chair, I would renew my motion that this being laid over for possible inclusion.
Thank you. House File 1327 is laid over. Members, next we'll do Representative Fabian's House File 1161. Laid over. Representative Fabian, do you want to move your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would move House File 1161. Not exactly sure where you want it to go.
Representative Fabian, House File 1161 is being laid over for possible inclusion. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Mr. Chair and members, this bill is a bill that's been a work in order. We've taken a lot of time to get this right. The pork producers and so forth have been working with MPCA, and I'm happy to report that there now appears to be peace in Hog Valley. So,
Representative Fabian, to that piece, you have an A2 amendment
Yes,
that
I
I
do,
believe you want to
Chair.
move. Representative Fabian.
yes, I'd like to move the A2. This is the language that has been agreed to by MPCA and the pork producers. The A2 amendment, as you have before you, I'll probably let MPCA speak to this just a little bit. But basically what we're trying to do is help out the small guys here, the middle-sized farms and so forth with their truck washing. Dr. Hartman has testified here in committee about the value of making sure that, we get these things cleaned up. So.
If you could identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Sure. Mr. Chair, members, my name is Mike Nelson. I'm the legislative coordinator at the Pollution Control Agency. As Representative Fabian had indicated, MPCA did work with the pork producers in trying to come up with an appropriate language on the amendments themselves. What this does is there's two parts to it. The first part of the amendment, in the past, feedlots that would wash their trucks at an off-site location, if they were less than 50,000 gallons, did not require a permit. This would move it up to 100,000 gallons per calendar year. The second part of the amendment looks at the training requirements for the application of that wastewater. And what this does is it excludes the training requirements in certain situations there for this particular, for the feedlot operators themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Do you want to bring down the testifiers, Representative? Are they even interested in testifying if we got peace in the valley? I wonder if, do one of you want to come down and confirm you got peace in the valley, or you want to nod, or how you want to do that?
Mr. Chair.
Looks like they're just going to nod. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members should have the letter here from David Preisler to kind of outlining the agreement and who this is intended to help out. Mr. Schoenfeld was here. He left earlier. I'm not exactly sure where he is. That's who's been working the hardest on this with MPCA, but there is broad agreement here.
And my understanding is there's a simultaneous hearing in the Senate is where he is at. So Representative Purcell has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the amendment language, just a couple of points to clarify, if you would. First one is, what's an average application rate, gallons per acre? What are we talking about putting on? I'm trying to get a handle on that 100,000 number.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Nelson.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Chair, members, what the 100,000 is in terms of the washing of the trucks themselves. And so if we look, we were told it's about, or we estimate around 300 gallons per truck wash.
But how, when they apply, excuse me, Mr.
Oh, you're
Chair,
okay.
Thank you. When they apply it, when they're going out and they're putting this on ag ground, right? What's the application rate on the ag ground? Any idea?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see Mr. Schoenfeld is here now. He might be able to answer that better, but the amount of waste that's actually in this water is very, very small. It's probably what is generated by 3 or 4 pigs or something like that. So it's really quite minimal.
Mr. Schoenfeld, did you hear the question, and if you could identify yourself for the record, and maybe after you answer the question, confirm you support the bill?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jerry Schoenfeld. I'm working with the Minnesota Pork Producers. As Representative Fabian had indicated, in 100,000 gallons, it's estimated that it would be equivalent to approximately what 1 cow would produce in terms of manure in a year, or 3 hogs. So it's a pretty small amount. In terms of the rates that it's applied, you're talking about that they, under their feedlot permits, they always have to do it under agronomic rates in any case. So I don't think you have any issue there. I guess that's about what I can tell you.
Follow up, Representative Purcell.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue either, but when we talk about applying things agriculturally, we talk about what we're doing per acre. That was my question. One other question. What's the industrial byproducts? I mean, is this manure, or what are we talking about?
Mr. Chairman, perhaps the PCA could answer as well, but the whole issue of this bill really is the fact that when we're talking about agricultural waste in this case, it is really not an industrial byproduct and it's not commercial. And that's why we're trying to carve out a little bit of specialty here for agriculture, because of the fact that we are talking about private, not commercial, and we're talking about agricultural, not necessarily industrial byproducts as you would think of them. And so I think that the point of that is that it's the small amounts, and I think that the PCA has agreed that it makes sense to do. It seems to be kind of a common sense situation here. But the industrial byproducts is defined by the PCA, and it is and what we're dealing with here is an industrial byproducts PCA that is a permit that is outside of the feedlot permit.
Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not trying to argue. I just, what are we talking about? Are we washing this stuff with chlorine? I don't think so, but I want to know what we're talking about.
Mr. Schoenfeld.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. Basically what we're talking about, to give you an idea what happens here, is these trucks, when they're like at Hormel as an example, are cleaned at Hormel. The manure is pushed out and it's done, but there's still a little manure and soap from the bottom. So for biosecurity purposes, what this is about is to basically come in most cases they're steam cleaned, and then they use a sanitizer that dries on the truck. And that's really all there is to it. There's really no other kinds of things that are involved.
Representative Purcell. Okay. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Schoenfeld, earlier Representative Fabian stated that the PCA and the pork producers had proclaimed peace in Pork Valley here. I just wanted to make sure that that was correct.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Schoenfeld.
Mr. Chairman, this bill was introduced in the Ag, or was heard in the Ag Committee, and we've talked with PCA for approximately 2.5 weeks, making tweaks along the way, and we are peace in the valley, and everybody's happy. So, yes.
Okay. Thank you. It sounds like Representative Fabian, we have not adopted the A2 yet. We need to get the bill in the shape you'd like, and then we'll be laying it over. Any discussion to the A2? All those in favor of the A2 say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, the A2 is adopted. Representative Fabian would like House File 1161. I'm sorry, Representative Hansen. Or I'm sorry, Hausman. Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just given the fact that the Chrysler letter references the disease transfer and pork producers have understood the devastating consequences whenever that isn't taken seriously, I would think that that's at least one piece of the discussion that you've had as you've figured out how you're going to manage that.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Schoenfeld.
Hausman, that is the main piece behind that drives this bill. The situation that we had last year with PED and this year with Also, the turkey disease is the influenza that's there. Another situation where you need this. We did have testimony in the Ag Committee from the Board of Animal Health in support of this bill and indicated how important it was in order to have this. The bill originally started from the fact that under the feedlot provisions, they could have a washing operation on the feedlot premise. The problem with that is that what you're doing is you're washing the disease right back in the place that you want to keep it away from. So what this is about, in order to get off of the premise, off of that site, maybe the next farm over, that you own, the intention here is to do that, but under the rules of the PCA, you had to do it, even though you could do it under the feedlot permit on the site, under the PCA rules, you had to do it with an industrial byproducts permit. And so we're trying to ease that a bit in order to encourage people. And this is primarily for smaller and medium-sized farms that would be involved in this kind of a situation, because most of the really large operations have already got the industrial byproducts permit that is talked about, and they've already, they meet it. One of the other portions of the permit is that you have a Class 4 operator in existence, and the larger operations probably can do that, but the smaller ones wouldn't.
Thank you. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to confirm, this is an issue that's been brought to me by family farmers in my region, and this does address it. It looks like exactly a situation I learned about in Blue Earth County, and thanks for fixing it up.
Thank you. Representative Fabian renews his motion that House File 1161 be laid over. Thank you, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Schellenfeld, for working on this and getting it resolved. So we've got that one laid over. And members, we are adjourned until tomorrow morning.